It's Richard from Ambassador here with a new series about the psychology of gaming. I've been inspired by all the Warhammer vids from Vince Venturella and others, and I thought I would try and contribute something back to the clan. So today I'm going to talk a bit about context, and the scene on the slide here shows a green cylinder on top of a checkerboard. And the interesting thing about this image is that the squares labelled A and B are actually identical colour. They're the same lightness, but our eye and brain don't see that at all. It sees A as being a dark grey colour, and it sees B as being the light grey colour. Now you might think I'm being foolish and lying and tricking you. Well, it is a form of trick. Your brain is being tricked. But if we cover up parts of the checkerboard, what you can see is that the B section, the B square, gradually gets darker and darker and darker until eventually you can see it is actually the same lightness. So the reason for this is essentially the context of B being surrounded by all those lighter squares, and the position of the green cylinder causes this effect. Now you might be saying, well, what's this got to do with gaming? Okay, well, let's start with some definitions of what psychology and gaming are. So gaming for me is all aspects of the hobby: modelling, painting and playing the games. And the psychology of this is really studying the behaviour. So that's all psychology is, really, studying behaviour, where behaviours are actions on the world, in this case, playing games. And there's lots of interesting research, a huge amount that we understand about the way in which the brain works, that explains a variety of phenomena, such as these interesting illusions. So to explain this a bit further, the shadow cast by this green cylinder is a purely perceptual effect. So if you look at the shadow, it's caused by there being slightly darker regions on the dark grey squares, and that's why the B square is seen as being the same luminance as the other lighter squares because of the context. So your brain is inferring there must be a light source to one side of the cylinder, as indicated by the gradient of light across it, and because of all the other the regular nature of the squares, your brain is in some ways cleverly inferring that there are only two different types of squares here. And this is an effect called colour constancy. So this happens all the time. You look around your living room, the wall's been painted white, but actually if you take a long hard look, you realise that all the shades of light coming off your wall are very different depending on where the windows are, where the lights are shining. And if you didn't have this thing called colour constancy, instead of seeing a nice coherent single world, it would all be broken up and split. Every time you saw a shadow, the surface would stop and it would look like there was a hole, or it looked like it was actually a different surface. So it's really effective at allowing us to interact successfully with the world around us, but it does cause these slightly strange effects. Now, to return to gaming, how does this relate to gaming? Well, in terms of the hobby, the painting side, well, this is something that comes up a lot. I'm listening to Vince's reviews of people's models on the PMP. He often talks about, well, how the model looks as a whole. So the most basic thing, well, that you've painted a lovely model, but what about the base? The base is an integral part of it, and doing even a small amount of work on the base can really enhance the whole, because when you look at the model, you can't not look at the base. You've got a black base, a bare base, and that's affecting your perception of the whole. This happens with colours as well. You put a colour on, paint a colour onto a model, and that colour is not seen in isolation. It's contrasted with the colours around it. So you have to be careful how you use colours. You can't just go, well, I'd like to put red and blue and green and all these colours on, and that comes back to those rules that Vince talks about of not overdoing it with the colours. Try and stick to as few colours as possible in some ways. The other thing that this tells us is, well, you don't want to put too much effort into areas of the model that people aren't really going to see. So this comes back to the idea of cheating, really, of keeping it simple and focusing on the areas people look at, like the faces and the shields, and also people look at the banners that you've done, right? So context is important for painting, but it's also important for gaming. So if you think about when you go to play your games, your experience of your game, you often attribute to the game you're playing. Oh, Age of Sigmar is rubbish because I got really bored. Well, actually, you can't look at that in isolation, that experience in isolation. Your prior expectations of how you think the game's going to work, the other games that you've played recently, your background to playing the game. Did you really want to play Age of Sigmar, or did you want to play another game? So I come to this from having prepared an army over many years, carefully making movement trays, finally getting to the point where I'm ready to play my first game of 8th, just as they announce that they're going to shift to Age of Sigmar. So for me, playing Age of Sigmar is quite difficult in some ways because I have all these inherent biases against it. I seem to be managing to slowly get over them, but it's always worth being aware of those biases. So I think in this instant, context can be really useful to think about rather than just blaming the game for your bad experience. Think about, well, what else is it? Is it the people you're playing the game with, the way they react to you? Do they taunt you as you lose? There are many aspects to a game that can make it fun, and often it's the people you're with rather than the actual game you're playing. So I hope these ideas have given you some thoughts about how you play your games and how you model, and I hope to speak to you soon when I cover some more topics about the psychology of gaming.